Though the tortoise, blessed with powers, live long, its days too will have an end. Though the winged serpent rides high on a cloud of mist, they too turn to dust at the last. Though the old war horse may be stabled, yet still it longs to gallop for 1,000 miles. And a noble-hearted man, though advanced in years, his ambitions do not rest. The span of life, whether short or long, depends not on fate alone. Hello all, this is Sons of Three Kingdoms, and what I just read is a poem by Cao Cao called Though the Tortoise Lives Long. Because today we are going to be looking at the Cao Cao in-game engine trailer. And as usual, I'm going to be analyzing the history and lore behind that. I read that poem firstly because I think it's very cool, but also it does go into... It's very fitting for Cao Cao. So he was a man who is not from the upper echelons of society, who's not really, you know, the one that anybody would look to for taking power. As I said before, he's kind of from a disrespected family. They're kind of new money. They're aligned with the wrong elements of society, or rather his father was. He was adopted by a eunuch. But Cao Cao, as Professor Rafe Descripsny, who is the kind of leading expert of Three Kingdoms in the English-speaking world, as the professor said, Cao Cao is a man from the margin. He kind of didn't really believe in fate, as that poem said, and he made his own way and clawed his way to the top, you know, which also goes into why he is called the hero of chaos. So as usual, I'm going to be playing this trailer, and I am going to be pausing it and kind of like talking you through the lore and history behind that. So let's go.
This land suffers. Torn apart by Dong Zhuo's cruel tyranny.
So that song that you heard in the background just then, in the trailer, that is based on a poem that, well, the lyrics are exactly from a poem that Cao Cao wrote when the coalition against Dong Zhuo first started. And Cao Cao wrote this poem to try to kind of incite the men of the land to join in against in this coalition. The lyrics just then were, there are heroes east of the gate. So the forces of the coalition mostly came from east, central, northern China, if that kind of makes sense, that blob. Because Dong Zhuo is, as I've mentioned before, from the northwest, and the kind of powerful governors and would-be warlords that were aggrieved were the ones in the more civilized and urbane central and east. Cao Cao was, as I've said before, quite a junior member of this coalition. And then, but, you know, he joined in anyway. He thought it was necessary to give what he can.
Yuan Shao, my friend, leader of the coalition. Together, we will put this chaos to an end.
So, this man, Yuan Shao, first of all, that scene, you know, where they encountered Dong Zhuo's troops slaughtering civilians. I mean, Dong Zhuo wasn't known for slaughtering civilians. He put one town under the sword at least, and it kind of like the news spread very fast, because this wasn't wartime, this was peacetime, and this wasn't pacifying rebels or, you know, foreign kingdoms or anything. It was just a town next to the capital that Dong Zhuo soldiers kind of raised. Now, Yuan Shao is the leader of the coalition, as Cao Cao mentioned. Yuan Shao is Cao Cao's childhood friend. But Yuan Shao came from a much more prominent family. He came from the second most important family basically in the empire. the Yuan family. The first most important, obviously, being the imperial family, the Liu family. Yuan Shao is the eldest male scion of this family. This family is it's the so-called Shizu, which roughly translates to the gentry. It was a large landowning literati family. The For 3 generations before this, at least one member of the family has served as one of the 3 excellencies, which is the 3 kind of like highest members of court. So Yuan Shao, was also a kind of young minister. And when Dong Zhuo tried to replace the child emperor with another child emperor, just to make him more pliable and also as a show of force against the court, Yuan Shao spoke up against Dong Zhuo, and there was a kind of a dramatized scene where Dong Zhuo pulled out his sword, and Lu Bu, standing right at Dong Zhuo's side, pulled out his halberd, and to threaten Yuan Shao. And Yuan Shao, in response, pulled out his own sword as a kind of a "my blade is as sharp as yours" moment. He then fled. He fled the capital, and when the coalition formed, as the elder scion of the most kind of renowned family across the land, and somebody who had heroically stood up against Dong Zhuo, Yuan Shao was elected the leader of the coalition. And for this public rebellion, Dong Zhuo had his entire family that was still in the capital killed. So yeah, he definitely lost a lot due to Dong Zhuo's tyranny as well. Although it must also be said that Yuan Shao was kind of the reason that Dong Zhuo happened at all. So I alluded in the launch trailer video that Dong Zhuo was invited into the capital by members of the gentry during a power struggle. Well, Yuan Shao was the brain genius who had the idea to invite this ravenous border general into the capital. But what are you gonna do? Oh, and sorry, I should also mention that I mean, I've mentioned it before, but Yuan Shao was the leader of the coalition, and Cao Cao, whilst being his old friend, is like many, many, many tiers below him.
Yet, at our most desperate, you will fail us. And reveal yourself unfit to lead.
So to kind of explain the drama that just happened, as I've said in my launch video, at a certain point, Dong Zhuo burned the capital to the ground and forced this horrific mass relocation west of the entire court, taking the child emperor with him to the western capital, Chang'an. So at this point, Cao Cao tried to convince the coalition to go after Dong Zhuo. He said, basically, the tyrant's on the run. He still has the emperor. He still has a court. We have to rescue them. And basically, nobody in the coalition agreed. Very few people agreed. And Cao Cao went off on his own and tried to bid others to support him. He gathered a small detachment. It was 2,000 to 3,000 men. The only one other detachment to join him was a detachment of this man named Wei Zi, who's a bit player. I won't go into it too much, but he was basically one of Cao Cao's old family friends. And the two of them pursued Dong Zhuo's army whilst expecting reinforcements. They encountered Dong Zhuo's rear guard at a battle at a place called Xingyang, and they had this battle called the Battle of Xingyang. Now, we don't know much about this battle, but what we do know is that they lost really badly. They were most likely outnumbered. They were definitely, not supplied and supported, and most likely, compared to Dong Zhuo's veteran troops, much more undertrained and under-equipped. But Wei Zi, that's Cao Cao's family friend, lost his life in this battle. Cao Cao himself was almost killed. At one point, his horse was killed from under him, and he was on foot. and in the middle of the battle, his cousin Cao Hong, who would also later become a prominent officer under him, rode past and offered Cao Cao his horse. Cao Cao, said, no, it's, fend for yourself. And Cao Hong kind of said, the empire can do without me, but it cannot do without you. And Cao Hong pushed Cao Cao onto the horse, and the two of them kind of hacked their way to safety. The only one other thing we know about this battle is that as they were retreating, the commanding officer of the Dong Zhuo's army, a man named Xu Rong, deemed it not. He didn't pursue because he thought that Cao Cao's men were very organized and kind of managed gave a good showing of themselves, and he wasn't confident of how well he could destroy them in a rout. So he did lose this battle, but it wasn't completely embarrassing, considering that he was most likely very outmatched. And when him and his remnants went back to the coalition camp, he saw the historical records said that at this point the great illustrious leaders of the coalition had basically just spent all their days not doing anything except feasting and scheming and drinking themselves into a stupor. And Cao Cao and his, war-hardened, newly defeated men, many of them who had lost their lives, Cao Cao basically chewed them out. And he, at this point, led his men and went away and left the coalition because he became convinced that the coalition was not capable of enacting any real change, not capable of rescuing the emperor, and not capable of restoring order and deposing the tyrant. And that was really the start of Cao Cao as an independent force. What else to say about this scene? Oh yeah, Yuan Shao wasn't there. Yuan Shao was commanding at a different front, but you gotta do some of these things for dramatic effect.
So I will banish this chaos.
The man just then in the eye patch, I've mentioned him before. His name is Xiahou Dun. He is a distant cousin of Cao Cao and a great warrior. I talked about him a bit in the E3 Battle for CRP video, so if you guys want to know more about it, just go watch that.
This kingdom will be brought to order.
So as you might be able to tell from that, after the coalition disbanded just due to constant backbiting and murdering each other, Yuan Shao and all the other coalition members basically went off to become their own warlords. Now Yuan Shao eventually became the most powerful warlord in the north, in China really, because the north at that part was the biggest part of China. And Cao Cao was also started rising and geographically kind of next to him. And the two men, at this point knew that one of them eventually would have to finish off the other one. They were rivals at this point. Yuan Shao had much more land, had much more men, as I said, much more prestigious family, wealthier, more respected. But as you might be able to guess, Cao Cao eventually won because, as I've said before, he is the founder of one of the three kingdoms. And yeah, they would kind of have this climactic showdown, and it would be one of the kind of the biggest campaigns in the Three Kingdoms era.
For I would rather betray the world than have the world betray me.
So that quote, for I would rather betray the world than have the world betray me, that quote is about 80% real. The actual historical quote it translates closer to something like, I would rather betray others than have others betray me. And it happened after Cao Cao accidentally killed a few members of a house that was like friends with his father and trying to help him. And when his companion kind of, said, "We did such a bad thing," Cao Cao, kind of very sadly tried to defend himself and said, "Better I betray others than others betray me." Now, that was what was recorded in the historical records. In the romanticizations, it kind of became a much more dramatic and villainous event where Cao Cao accidentally killed some members of this household, and then to hide his mistakes, killed the rest of the household as well. And when his companion kind of blamed him for it, he said, "I would rather betray the whole world than have the world betray me," much more with kind of much more malice and cunning. And that really goes into a lot of the differences between the history and the romanticized versions. The romantic traditions, it's like it's always seated in truth, but because history mostly doesn't have clear heroes and villains, so the romantic traditions have to make heroes and villains. So as far as the romantic traditions is considered, Cao Cao is definitely, if not the villain, at least the anti-hero. He's definitely the antagonist of the Three Kingdoms.
A new opponent. Let us begin.
And as a romantic tradition requires a villain, it also requires a hero. And here we see the hero. It's Liu Bei, who I talked about in the launch trailer. He is in many ways the kind of like antithesis of Cao Cao. Cao Cao is always very mighty and ambitious and, just an absolute hegemon. Liu Bei is the scrappy underdog, sometimes very humble and meek. And Cao Cao believed in achieving his goals at whatever the end cost, and Liu Bei, he had a much stronger set of personal rules and morals that he seemed to follow. It wasn't to say, like, in actual history, it wasn't to say one man is good or one man is bad, but even in actual history, you could see that the two men had a very different way of doing things. And after Liu Bei had been enemies, sometimes allies, but mostly an enemy of Cao Cao for a long time before this. But after Cao Cao destroyed Yuan Shao, Liu Bei actually fought for Yuan Shao in that particular war. Liu Bei basically became his next biggest rival, except the situations were kind of switched because Liu Bei was much, much weaker than Cao Cao. And their rivalry would basically set the foundation for the Three Kingdoms. Cao Cao would end up founding one of the Three Kingdoms, and Liu Bei would end up founding another of the Three Kingdoms. Sorry, I gotta correct myself. Cao Cao's son would end up founding one of the Three Kingdoms. Cao Cao, for his own reasons, he never wanted to found a new kingdom. The only time that they teamed up, because I said they did team up once, and the only time they actually teamed up was to defeat Lu Bu, the god of war, which I kind of talked about in the Battle for Xiapi video. But other than that, they were just bitter enemies the entire time. So
Let's begin.
And that is the trailer. I hope that was educational. That concludes basically our analysis of all three of the trailers. Obviously, it's still a while, unfortunately, until this game gets released. So I think what I'm going to do until then is have more lore and history videos. I'm going to first produce a series of videos that kind of set the stage for the Three Kingdoms, not in the sense of the narratives I talked about, but more just like in the sense of the actual history. What was warfare of this age like? What was the geography? What was the administration of the Han Dynasty that, kind of like resulted in this? What were the politics like? And also what was a class in society like at that time? Because one of the very big themes of Three Kingdoms is the men from the margins, really. These like previously much lower rungs of society kind of overthrowing the old order. Yeah, so look forward to that, and thanks so much for watching, guys. I will see you later.